Welcome, Pewter Report readers, viewers, and listeners to a brand new edition of the Pewter Report podcast, energized by Celsius, the official energy drink of pewterreport.com. It is a Thursday edition of the show, not our last episode of the week. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And we were going to discuss the Bucs' unsung heroes from this most recent season, but with some big news coming out today regarding the Bucs and their coaching staff, we have pivoted once again, and we'll be talking about the news that everybody wants to discuss. And that is the Bucs defensive coordinators, co-defensive coordinators, Kacy Rodgers and Larry Foote. Looks like Kacy Rodgers is going to take the defensive line coaching position with the Detroit Lions. And Larry Foote, who has a history with the state of Michigan and Detroit specifically, might become their new defensive coordinator. So we're going to break it all down and talk about what's next for the Bucs in that position group. I'm your host, Matt Matera. Joined with me is my fellow co-host, Adam Slavon. Adam, how are we doing? Is your head spinning like mine is?
Matt, just a little bit, because, we were preparing for the podcast, talking about some unsung heroes. Nope. At the 11th hour,
Right.
The Bucs and their coaching staff, plenty of changes in just a wild past couple of days, Matt, this offseason. We knew that Liam Cohen would be staying, and after he did not take the Jaguars job. But who would have thought that the Bucs defensive coaching staff would be pried away and poached by a team that is 15-2, and they just made the playoffs as the 1 seed in the Lions. So really a crazy development between Kacy Rodgers and potentially Larry Foote walking out the door. And you just never know when this kind of news is going to break.
You never really do. And it's surprising. First of all, it's surprising with Kacy Rodgers, right? Because the only reports out there was that he's going to interview with the Packers for the D-line coach. So, nothing came out about him actually going to interview with Detroit. And now all of a sudden he's taking the job with the Detroit Lions. Like, not even hey, they're going to look at a couple of different candidates. Just no, we want Kacy Rodgers. That's how it's going to go. And then on the flip side with Larry Foote, again, all of this just came out so quickly. And then for it to be Detroit again, it's like, damn it. Like, the Lions took it really to heart that the Bucs beat them in the regular season last year. And it kind of makes sense why they'd want these two coaches in particular, just given how the Lions defensive room has kind of been ravaged with Aaron Glenn taking the head coaching job with the Jets, and their D-line coach now became the defensive coordinator of the New England Patriots. So they have positions to fill. Yeah. And outside of their own division, there haven't been many other teams that the Lions have played more than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've played them 3 times in the last 2 seasons, with the playoff game last year and then the week 2 game this season. So a team that they're familiar with, Dan Campbell, who used to coach with Todd Bowles back in the day, I'm sure they have a bit of a relationship as well.
Yeah.
It just, the part that sucks the most, Adam, I think, is that these are the 2 best coaches on the Bucs defensive coaching staff as far as it went with assistant coaches. And now you have to replace those 2 guys while trying to really not inspire, but convince everybody else that Kevin Ross, Nick Rapone, and George Edwards are the guys for their respective positions.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you look at the bright spot of the Bucs defense this past season, it was the defensive line. And who coached it? Kacy Rodgers. Whether it was Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey, or Logan Hall, they played some of their best football under Rodgers. And while they're extremely talented, of course, this goes back to Rodgers kind of being a defensive line guru for over 20 years, starting with the Cowboys in 2003 with Leroy Glover, went to the Dolphins, Cameron Wake, a lot of Pro Bowl defensive linemen there. And then lastly, with the Jets, they had Muhammad Wilkerson and Leonard Williams. So every stop that Rodgers has gone, he's gotten productive play out of his defensive line. And in terms of the run game, Matt, the Bucs only averaged they only allowed 97.8 yards a game, which was the 4th best mark in the league. So if there was a bright spot, it's obviously Kacy Rodgers and with what he did. And then you have Larry Foote, who at just 44 years old he could still be and is kind of viewed around the league as a future head coach. Other executives and even Tom Pelissero, he came out with a list earlier this year, and he mentioned Larry Foote. And then there's obviously the connection that he has with Michigan, and the connection John Spytek had to Michigan led to him getting one job.
Yeah.
But it could lead him to getting this one. So it's just a really tough blow. And these weren't the defensive coaches that you probably wanted to see gone. I mean, that list is George Edwards, Kevin Ross, Nick Rapone. But now it's like, do the Bucs just clear the deck? They clear the house and just say, we need all new young defensive coaches because it worked for the offense.
I'm completely fine with wiping the slate clean. And part of the reason that we thought Kacy Rodgers would still come back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is because of his relationship with Todd Bowles. I mean, it goes since 2005. Like, they've been coaches together in different capacities for sure.
Yeah.
But for a very, very long time, a little bit with the Cowboys, with the Dolphins, and then obviously with Tampa Bay. And, you know, if they were very tight, but Kacy Rodgers was still like, all right, I'm going to go to the Detroit Lions, maybe that recalibrates the thinking for Todd Bowles a little bit. And maybe he decides to revamp the rest of that coaching staff room, because Pewter Report can report as well that the Bucs gave an offer to Kacy Rodgers. They offered him a new contract. He declined that contract. He chose to move on and go to the Detroit Lions. And you're right, Adam. Kacy Rodgers deserves a lot of respect for what he's done, because I get it. People will look at the Kalijah Cancys and the Vita Veas and everybody else that he's worked with and the players from other teams that you mentioned as well. But it's one thing to have good talent or great talent. Yeah. It's another to get the most out of that talent as well. A little bit of a basketball analogy, but there's some basketball fans in here. Look at Michael Jordan and LeBron James. You know, it took MJ and LeBron both several years before they won a championship. They had other coaches that couldn't get over the hump with the best player in the game. And then Phil Jackson comes along and, wins it with Michael. And Eric Spoelstra, the Heat coach, wins it with LeBron. It's not always just, hey, you have the best player, you can get it done. So Kacy Rodgers deserves that credit for what Vita Vea has done, for what Kalijah Cansey has done. And like you mentioned before, Logan Hall as well, having career best, 5.5 sacks, 28 tackles. So it's a tough blow for Tampa Bay. I mean, Kacy Rodgers, year in and year out, getting the job done, being able to stop the run, having your 3 defensive tackles be the leader in sacks for these teams with 7.5, 7, and 5.5, which was tied Logan Hall with Levante David. But nonetheless, you're missing a huge chunk of the success of this team with Kacy Rodgers gone. And why would you go to Detroit? Well, let's remember, a lot of injuries were had on that team. And the offense, even though Ben Johnson is gone, you still have Jared Goff, you still have Amon-Ra St. Brown, the 2 running backs, and Dan Campbell as a leader. You're going to a 15-win team. The only thing that changes a little bit for Kacy Rodgers is that it's a slight demotion going from co-defensive coordinator just to regular defensive line coach, but we don't know the specifics of the contract, what else that entails. Maybe he was just tired of Tampa. Maybe he saw the writing on the wall with the rest of the defense. We don't necessarily know, but all we know at this point is that Kacy Rodgers is out of town, and then Larry Foote may be next.
Yeah, and while it might be viewed as like a slight step down for Rodgers, the ability to maybe get more national recognition. I mean, you saw Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, they just got head coaching jobs. And so if Foote, in his case particularly, if he goes and becomes the defensive coordinator of the Lions, he really could become a head coach here in a very short order. And just the ability to work with guys, the Lions had Lee McNeil, Aiden Hutchinson, pretty much their whole defense was injured at one point or another. But the ability to work with those guys, I mean, it's only going to be another big bullet point for each of their resumes should Larry Foote also head out the door too.
So some people might be wondering, and he's just interviewing. There is a chance he's like, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. I'm going to go back to Tampa Bay. But there's some people that are wondering, why would Larry Foote, who becomes the sole defensive coordinator of the Buccaneers with Kacy Rodgers going to Detroit. Why would he leave Tampa and go to Detroit for the same exact position when you already have it in Tampa? But let's remember, Todd Bowles is still the one calling plays for Tampa Bay and their defense, despite being the head coach. Larry Foote still has a very important role, and he was the pass game coordinator, which did struggle this season. But it's still the TODD. It's still Todd Bowles that is dialing up the blitzes and making his calls on third down. That responsibility still comes with him. So Larry Foote going to the Detroit Lions, if he goes to the Lions, it hasn't happened just yet. He is interviewing with them. But if he goes to the Detroit Lions, he's going to have an opportunity to actually call plays. And it kind of comes back to Liam Cohen and wanting to go back to Kentucky because he wanted to call plays and then go to the Bucs because he was going to have that opportunity. It's not just Larry Foote getting to call plays. It's dialing up something for Aiden Hutchinson, who's going to be healthy, and getting to coach him. Terrion Arnold had a pretty good rookie season. Brian Branch is a pretty damn good defensive back as well. So there's a lot of interesting pieces for the Lions when they are fully healthy. Also, Larry Foote was born in Detroit. He played for the Lions for one season. I know a lot of people look at him as a Pittsburgh Steeler, as they should. He played a majority of his career there and won 2 Super Bowls. But he did play for the Lions, and obviously he played at Michigan. So there's a lot of home cooking, if you will, with Larry Foote and the Detroit Lions. So it's been scramble mode for the Bucs over the past couple of days. I mean, they were lucky to have Liam Cohen back, and I don't think the two coaches leaving impacts Liam Cohen like rethinking his decision to come back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because the offense was the one carrying the group anyway.
Yeah.
But I talked about on yesterday's show, if you're watching a championship game, like the two AFC and NFC championship games coming up this weekend, the Super Bowl's around the corner, you make a couple of bets in those games. Odds are you're not going to win every single one, but you want to win more than you lose some. Going into last night, it was the Bucs lost John Spytek, but maybe they hit on a parlay with Liam Cohen returning. That comes out as a win. Today, with Rodgers gone and Foote likely out the door next, now it feels like a little bit of a loss. Overall, I still think if you're adding everything up, it's a bit of a net gain. But man, there's a lot of things the Bucs have to figure out on the defensive side, which we were not expecting this offseason.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to a comment that Bowles made at his end of season press conference. And he's like, if your coaches aren't interviewing for other positions, and you're not doing it right. And he was referring to Liam Cohen, but it ended up being Kacy Rodgers and Larry Foote out the door. And that, again, it kind of goes back to what will the Bucs do next? Because with Rodgers leaving first, you're like, all right, maybe Foote can be the sole defensive coordinator, kind of a consolidation of power, less chiefs in the room, if you will, kind of giving orders. But now it's like if they're both gone, they don't have a defensive coordinator at all. They don't have somebody really taking orders from Bowles. And then the other 3 assistant coaches left aren't the most inspiring options. So what will the Bucs do at the top of the defensive hierarchy? They still have to get a defensive line coach. Larry Foote, even though the inside linebacker room was kind of a weakness of the defense, I mean, he's still viewed highly, and he's still young enough to where he can continue growing and developing. If you don't have those two, and the other options aren't inspiring, I mean, the best bet is just to say, well, just to clear the house. At that point, you kind of have to. I mean, you have old coaches. You saw the offense. They went young. Defensively, the only young coach that could really step into a role is Rashad Johnson. There's going to be a lot of external moves, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's the other side of it, is because immediately you start thinking, all right, who's going to be the D-line coach? Who's going to be the inside linebackers coach? And, we talk a lot about some of the assistant coaches that the Bucs have on offense, whether, it's a legend like Tom Moore or, Thad Lewis, the quarterback's coach. And you just mentioned Rashad Johnson, who is a secondaries coach. They also have Keith Tandy, who formerly played for the Bucs, who's a defensive and special teams assistant. Those guys are all people in the secondary, which is a little bit different. Now, Larry Foote at one point became the outside linebackers coach for the Bucs. So it is plausible for somebody to coach a different position than they played. But does Todd Bowles feel comfortable putting like Keith Handy as an inside linebackers coach? We
Right.
won't really know until those announcements are made. What teams are they necessarily looking at? Like, the Packers just fired their defensive line coach and their defensive coordinator. Do they make the Packers defensive coordinator a positions coach? Like, that might be something that could become a little bit interesting. And then also, not 100% sure how it works either, but what if, and I don't know how many other positions are open for the Lions, or if Larry Foote gets this job, that's kind of clean house, with the exception of Kacy Rodgers, or clean whatever is left of that house, and bring in some other guys from Tampa Bay, even though how they struggled last season might not be the case. But does he poach an assistant coach? Does he poach some of the guys that we just talked about before? It's another kind of obstacle to talk about when it comes to this offseason carousel, which is in full swing. And I don't know if it's to the point of how it was last season with an offensive coordinator search, but it's definitely going to take on a life of its own this offseason.
Yeah, it is. And it's going to mean that Todd Bowles is going to have to interview guys that he's not really familiar with, because you kind of look back to his days with the Jets and the Cardinals. That was so long ago that really a lot of the coaches and guys that he worked with, they're either in different roles. The Titans defensive coordinator, Denard Wilson, he was one coach with Todd Bowles, but a lot of those guys are in other positions now. They're not coming to Tampa Bay. So Bowles, after the year, he mentioned looking internally and trying to find solutions, but this is going to take an external search. I don't know if they're going to interview 10 different guys, like you said, but they're going to have to interview multiple people and try to get some different ideas and different voices in the room and see what that leads to, because it does need to change.
And this kind of makes me wonder as well, will the Bucs maybe go into the college ranks the way that they did on the offensive side with Liam Cohen? Maybe they find that young and up and coming coach on the defensive side to fill out inside linebacker, or just find a new defensive coordinator. Like the Bengals just did it the other day. They took Notre Dame's defensive coordinator, Al Golden, I believe his name is, and made him their new defensive coordinator. The problem is with Bowles calling the plays, it is an upgrade, but you don't get the reps and the repetitions of being able to call a play in certain situations and over again. So, yeah, we'll see how that looks. We got a couple of super chats to get to. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll get to some comments as well. Bucks Basement, thank you for the $1.99 super chat. Says, perfectly fine with getting new blood on the defensive staff. So, Adam, how do you feel about, there's been some conversation back and forth with fans, with other people in the media. Some people are happy that overall the coaching staff is changing. On the other hand, Kacy Rodgers was the best at his job. So do you think this starts an avalanche of more moves to come?
That's a good question. And the way I see it now with Rodgers and Foote, if they're gone, I think that does lead to other moves being made, because the other defensive coaches, like if they're sticking around, like if Rodgers and Foote were to be around, okay, maybe you can just have stability and continuity there. But if the top guys are gone, you might as well just start the avalanche now, because you don't want to do it next year. If you're already making moves now, you just do it all at once. And so getting new blood on the defensive coaching staff, it was a good thing if it was the other defensive coaches. I mean, these are the two best defensive coaches that the Bucs have. So losing them is a tough blow for Todd Bowles, especially because he's so close to him. He can rely on them, kind of delegate some of the defensive tasks. And now he doesn't have that luxury.
And by the way, Larry Foote was also offered a contract extension from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So what does that mean? There have been two coaches between Larry Foote and Kacy Rodgers who have been offered new contracts and contract extensions that are not coming back to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this season. What does that mean? Do they not believe in Todd Bowles? Do they not believe in the overall system, in the coaching staff, the other assistant coaches that they have with Kevin Ross and George Edwards and Nick Rapone? it's a very intriguing question for this team when it comes to the Bucs this season, because we thought, okay, Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator, is back. He chose to come back, or the Bucs threw a lot of money at him that made him say, okay, I'll come back for one more season. And yet now it's the defensive guys who all struggled. As a unit, they struggled. We know that Rodgers looked pretty good. Foote has an influence on this team. Maybe it wasn't the best for the linebackers this year. But all of a sudden, these two guys say, you know what? I'm going to try somewhere else. Is it because it's the Detroit Lions? What if another team came and knocking? What if a middle-of-the-road team came knocking? Or a bad team? Would they go to that team? What if Seattle was like, hey, we want to bring you guys on board? Do they go to Seattle? I don't necessarily know, but something seems afoot. No pun intended with Larry Foote being involved with this. But something seems up a little bit. But now, between Larry Foote and Kacy Rodgers, neither coach wants to come back to Tampa. Maybe it's for a leveling up. Maybe it's for an upgrade in their career. But, man, that's a little sus. That's a little skeptical, knowing that they got contract offers to work with the coach that they've been with for several years at this point.
Yeah, and in Foote's case, he played under Bowles. And so just kind of seeing them both decide to maybe think that the grass is greener on the other side, it's really intriguing because they had that stability here. They weren't going anywhere with Todd Bowles. If he was making defensive changes, they were sticking around. And now it's like, you kind of wonder, when Rodgers went to go interview with the Packers a couple days ago, you thought that it was just maybe leverage into getting a pay raise. What were the Bucs offers to each of these coaches? Were they competitive enough, or was it just such a leap for them that they decided to move on and take it?
Bucs Basement with a $4.99 super chat. Thank you very much. Says,
thank you.
Let's not act like the reason the run game was good was not because teams know they could torch our secondary, so they didn't bother running the ball. I mean, teams ran less against the Bucs. There's no doubt about it, but they stopped it when they decided to run it. I mean, Saquon Barkley had a big run against the Bucs in a game that the Bucs won, by the way, early in the season. But outside of that, no one really ran roughshod against the Buccaneers. Yes, they could pass on them all day long, but also, this is a team that was able to stop the run since 2019. Like, they've always been able to stop the run. They've had some up and down years, because 2019, 2020, and 2021, you were lucky to get like 60 rushing yards against the Bucs. Like, they were that good. They were that stout. And it's cool seeing the transition. It was Gerald McCoy and Vita Vea, and then Ndamukong Suh and Vita Vea for a couple seasons. And obviously the one constant is Vita Vea, but Kalijah Kancey in the mix now. They've still been able to stop the run, whether Nacho, Raheem Nunez-Roches is in there, whether Greg Gaines, who's been on the team for the past 2 years, Will Golston obviously is a Bucs lifer. They still continue to find a way to stop the run. I understand it's skewed Bucs Basement a little bit with the amount of passing yards the Bucs allowed, but they were still stopping the run, even when teams were attempting it, especially against the Chargers. And I know their starting running back was hurt, but the Chargers were a team that loved running the football no matter what, and they just put the screws to them over and over and over. So I still feel very confident about the Bucs being able to stop the run, regardless of who's coaching, who's calling the plays, and what personnel they have, because that's just what they do as a unit.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Chargers. I go back to the Cowboys. Rico Dowdle coming into that game, he was a leading rusher in the NFL, 3 straight 100-yard games. The Bucs shut him down, and they shut down pretty much any running back week in and week out. And that goes back to Kacy Rodgers coordinating the run game. He's the one deciding how to game plan against these rushing offenses. And it's not like the Bucs didn't go up against their fair share of rushing attacks. Back when they faced the Lions, and they had Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, Saquon Barkley, Dowdle, Chuba Hubbard. There's plenty of talent, but the Bucs' ability to stop it, I mean, that's a testament to the coaching staff. If there was a good part of the defense, it was definitely that aspect.
One thing I'll never stop saying is that Celsius is the best energy drink around. Of course, Celsius is the official energy drink of PewterReport.com. We love them for several reasons, including that they have the best flavor of energy drinks around. Check out all the fantastic flavors they have, whether it's the Arctic vibe, the new Playa vibe, or the Playa vibe, as Scott likes to say. It's a pina colada flavor. You also see the sparkling watermelon lemonade flavor on the screen there as well. Can't go wrong with any of them. So if you need to know where to find a Celsius energy drink, head on over to the Celsius store locator on their website. Punch in your address and it'll tell you the closest location where you could pick one up. Could be a Walmart, a Target, a Publix, a Stop and Shop, your local convenience store, or your bodega.
Bodega.
And once you keep going to your bodega and you know you love Celsius and you want more, you want to get it in bulk, you can buy it in bulk over on Amazon with the subscribe and save. Have it sent to your place of residence whenever you want. Do it at your own leisure. Just make sure you're drinking Celsius energy drinks, the official energy drink of pewterreport.com. A couple of cool comments as well about Celsius. Jeff the Champ, of course, doing the bodega over and over and over again. Payne Gusto says, drinking that cosmic vibe as we speak. Love seeing that. Nathan, to begin the show, I put this up earlier, but it deserves repeating. Just cracked a Celsius, ready for another episode, and we are ready for you. Kieran Butt with the comment says, I'm confused. I get the pushback to Rodgers going to Detroit, but Foote, are we going to forget the massive regression that Britt took under him this year? I know it wasn't solely on him, but still. Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. We saw a regression from Devin White the year before, and really started 2 years ago. KJ Britt wasn't necessarily the guy. On the flip side, Taurasi Dennis has looked pretty good up until his season-ending injury. So it's fair to criticize, no doubt about it. I'm not just going to sit here and be like, no, Larry Foote did this, this, and this. No, Larry Foote has certainly had his flaws, but, you know, let's also remember he was the outside linebacker when Shaq Barrett broke the Bucs single-season sack record. He was the outside linebackers coach when JPP and Shaq balled out in 2020 and won a Super Bowl and ran roughshod against the Chiefs' defensive line to go and win the Super Bowl in Tampa during that 2020 season. So, sure, you can always say, well, he had talent over here, but he didn't have talent over there, and the good talent prevailed and the bad talent didn't. It's always a mixed bag. There's no one that has 100%, figured out how to get someone to play at their absolute best. I mean, look at Bill Belichick, right? He can find a 7th-round pick and make them a Hall of Famer, or a 6th-round pick in Tom Brady's case. But he's also missed on like the last 5 first-round picks. There's not an exact recipe to it. But it's very fair criticism, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and I think like there is some back and forth there when looking at Foote and the work he did. But you can also say KJ Britt played well at the end of the 2023 season when he was kind of rotating in for Devin White. That's why the Bucs gave him a chance to be the starter this year. And then I don't know if I would blame it on Foote. I think it was just more on Britt's ability to play. But then also you got to look at the inside linebacker room. It was a revolving door. You had Deion Jones coming off the street and playing meaningful snaps in a playoff game. That's a testament to kind of Larry Foote trying to make things work and kind of gluing together an inside linebacker room that was just practice squad guys.
No, it's true. It was very slim pickings this year when it came to the depth of the Buccaneers. Matt Person says, do we get compensation picks for losing them? Anybody? I believe they do not. It's only when a minority coach goes to a head coaching role or a general manager role.
Yeah.
So the Lions are actually going to get a lot of picks one pick because Aaron Glenn is going from defensive coordinator of the Lions to the head coach of the New York Jets. So I believe they're getting a 3rd-round compensatory pick for that. So unfortunately, the Bucs will not be getting a comp pick for losing 2 of their defensive coordinators. And I'm curious what Todd Bowles does in naming a new defensive coordinator. First of all, does he even name a new defensive coordinator, or does he just say, we have all assistant coaches, I'm the head coach and defensive coordinator because I'm calling the plays as well. Because we've seen with offensive teams, there will be a head coach, there will be an offensive coach or offensive coordinator, but the head coach is the play caller. Bowles is the defensive play caller, but wasn't the co-defensive coordinator. I don't even know who would be the top candidate to be the defensive coordinator, just kind of based on what we've seen from these other coaches.
I think it would be George Edwards because he was a defensive coordinator in the past, I want to say, with the Vikings. So probably by experience, you might give it to him. But when you look at those options, I mean, again, Todd Bowles would probably just be better off not having a defensive coordinator. But at the same time, that's a lot of responsibility and all that game planning. It has to go to somebody.
Right, and Edwards has been there the least, though, with Nick Rapone and Kevin Ross. So it would almost make more sense that it would be Ross or Rapone if they want the job. But then at the same time, a lot of us are saying those guys really shouldn't be in there in the first place. So it's a weird tightrope to walk right now with this Bucs and their defensive coaching staff. At least the offensive coaching staff is figured out. Don't need to worry about that. And that was the best side of the ball. So while things do look like they are in dire straits, let's remember the change was needed on the defensive side anyway. So we shall see.
Matt, question for you.
Sean,
if you were Todd Bowles right now and you have these two vacancies, should Foote leave, would you wait to make other moves and letting go the other assistant coaches if you were set on letting them go? Like to not have all 5 spots open at once? Would you rather focus on the 2 that you have maybe rather than all 5?
Oh, that's a good question because you're putting out a lot of fires essentially. If you let go of 3 other coaches, now you have 5 coaching vacancies. The problem is the longer that you wait, it's like musical chairs. Like everyone's going to have a seat. And now you're looking around being like, what are we going to do? Who are we going to go after? And that was kind of the problem a couple of years ago when Todd Bowles became the head coach of the Bucs. He couldn't make any staff changes because it was late into March and everybody had already been signed and had their roles. If they're going to do something, now is the time to do it. So as chaotic as it would be, you have to do it now or it's going to be too late. I mean, look at the Jaguars. I think that's a perfect example.
The Jaguars.
They kept Trent Baalke, the general manager. Ben Johnson said, I don't want to work with him. We don't know exactly what Liam Cohen's reason was for leaving. But moral of the story is they weren't able to hire him. Then they fire him. Now what are they doing? It's all over the place.
Yeah, Jaguars are the definition of dysfunctional.
No doubt about it. John Doe, putting it to the Bucs and Todd Bowles, says, you got to be a real moron to hire any of our defensive coaches, although we're stupid for hiring a defensive-minded coach as our head coach in a passing league. Adam, your reaction to that comment?
I do not agree with that comment, but I will say, like in a passing league, I think defensive coaches still have a role. And like you just saw the Patriots hire Mike Vrabel, and he's a defensive-minded coach as their head coach. I mean, there's still a niche for them. Maybe they're not as dominant as they once were, but defenses at the end of the day do win championships. And the 2 coaches that were pried, the fact that they're going to the best, arguably the best team in the NFC going into next year, I mean, that speaks volumes. And that's like, they're intriguing candidates for a reason. And I don't think it was idiotic for another team to go after them after you saw what they've done in Tampa Bay over the past few years. So I don't agree with that. I'd be curious to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Todd is a moron by any means. I don't think, obviously, things did not work out this season. I don't think you're an idiot just because, one thing did not work out. If you want to criticize for too much loyalty, if you want to criticize for being late to make moves, then sure. But, Kacy Rodgers brought value. Are the Lions morons for poaching Kacy Rodgers? I don't think so. Larry Foote, he's a cool dude, Larry Foote. I think he brings a little bit of that leadership and masterclass that you want.
Yeah.
And when you hire a defensive coach to be a head coach, and I know he's going to be the defensive coordinator, but ultimately he wants to be a head coach like a lot of these guys, ultimately, if you are a defensive coach that gets hired to be a head coach, you have to bring something else besides just, hey, I'm good on defense. It has to be leadership. It has to be a way to connect to players and front office and teamwork and all of that stuff. It's not exactly fair, but that's the nature of the NFL today.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Let's see. Hezo 813 says, what will tick me off is if Foote does get the defensive coordinator job and goes on to have success running the defense. Bowles let a great coach leave right under his nose and should have been given the opportunity here. Well, again, the Bucs offered a contract to Larry Foote. He didn't want to take it. And it would have been for a defensive coordinator job. It's not like Todd Bowles would have demoted him from being a defensive coordinator. We don't know how much the Lions sweetened the pot, and maybe they gave him a little bit more. Maybe his attachment to Detroit and Michigan swayed it a little bit. But the Bucs tried to keep Larry Foote. There's no doubt about that. They tried to have him stay in Tampa and continue with this team that has made the playoffs 5 years in a row and won the division 4 years in a row, but he didn't want to take it. Now, if he runs the same exact offense as Todd Bowles and cleans up a lot of the mistakes that we got on Bowles' case for, that will make people and myself rip their hair out and rip my hair out. So that certainly will have to be paid attention to for next season.
Yeah, and if you're an NFL coach right now and you have the Lions knocking on your door saying, hey, we want to interview you, I mean, you take that interview no matter what. And even if the Bucs offered him a role here in Tampa, like the job in Detroit, I mean, that's a promotion because you'll be getting to call the defensive plays. You won't be able to do that in Tampa under Todd Bowles. So it would be letting him go, but it would also be he's taking that chance and he wants to elevate to become a head coach in this league, and he's still young enough to keep evolving. And you don't know, he's kind of plateaued maybe in terms of being able to evolve when you're just kind of sitting there waiting under Todd Bowles for your chance.
There needs to be an influx of, and it comes with youth, but an influx of new ideas. That's really what it comes down to with the Bucs. Bat W says Glazers may be triggering the defensive change potentially, but again, they offered those contracts. So unless they really lowballed them, which I don't think that would be the case, just knowing how the Glazers have offered contracts to other coaches. Again, Liam Cohen returning. I just don't see that being the case. Steven Stansfield, the Bucks Dega comment. I want to try the cherry cola so bad. Yes, Scott is a big time fan.
That's a great flavor.
Michael LaRue, Warren Sapp as the new D-line coach. Unlikely, but we can dream. We've talked about this before. Warren Sapp would definitely put Todd Bowles in his place. Sapp has been out here before, but hasn't been invited back. Obviously, he got the coaching job with Colorado as well. Their personalities may not be the best to mesh together. Now, if Bowles wasn't here, but he is. But hypothetically, if someone else was if Liam Cohen was the head coach, eventually, and Warren Sapp wanted a coaching job, I think he absolutely should be the defensive line coach. He did a good job with Colorado. We'll see what happens with Deion Sanders as well. Will he stay at Colorado? Will he eventually take an NFL head coaching job? Does Warren Sapp want to continue to live in Colorado where it's snow all the time? And obviously he's from Florida. That would be a very interesting one.
Well, I remember we also saw Warren Sapp at the Senior Bowl too, kind of coaching the defensive line. And I remember one in particular was Keanu Benton, who's gone on and done great things with the Steelers. You don't know if Sapp might have gave him some tips and tricks there, but I think Sapp would be a good defensive line coach. And really, you talk about the Bucs defense needing that fire starter, that jerk, that kind of like arrogant guy. I mean, Sapp would fire people up, so it would be interesting.
He knows how to motivate people in one way or another. The same way I get motivated when I see all of these Pewter Platinum members. So we just want to say thank you very much to Scott Federico, Rathel Gordon, Noah Parr, Scotty J, Dave Anderson, Eric McMillan, Zach Jarvis, Hezo813, Ash Fishpool, Joel Elrican, and Sam. Thank you all very, very much for being Pewter Platinum members. We really, Really appreciate that. And by the way, the Pewter Report podcast is not done just yet today. We're going to have a primetime podcast tonight as well. So another doubleheader, our second doubleheader this week, coming up tonight at 8:30. It is the first Bucs mock draft show of the season. The first Pewter Report mock draft will actually be dropping live in about 17 minutes. It's going to be posted on pewterreport.com at 5 o'clock once we wrap up the Pewter Report podcast. And then Scott Reynolds and Josh Capo, who collabed on this mock draft, we'll talk all about it at 8:30 tonight, right on our YouTube channel on Pewter Report TV. Of course, Friday we will have our Pewter Insider. That's coming up at 1:30. So if you're a Pewter Platinum and Premier member, please join us for that one or leave a pre-written question and comment. We'll get to that as well. We're going to recap everything that happened with the Bucs coaching moves this week. And then on Monday, another primetime episode of the Pewter Report podcast. We will be live from Mobile, Alabama, getting ready for the Senior Bowl, and we will preview the Senior Bowl as well. We'll talk about some prospects we are looking at, what positions of need the Bucs have a need for the most, and get into what's going on for the week. So that's all the scheduling stuff coming up for your Tampa Bay Buccaneers and your favorite Bucs website, pewterreport.com. We have a super chat to get to of big-time figures and a topic we were just talking about. Thank you to Black Gold 1999 with this 1999 super chat, who says, so what's the chances of us grabbing Warren Sapp? I remember saying this some weeks ago. Sorry, I'm late. No worries, Black Gold 1999. And thank you very much for your generous super chat once again. The odds of Warren Sapp becoming the new defensive line coach is intriguing, or the chances of it, I should say, is very intriguing. Ultimately, I don't think it'll happen just based on the personality of Warren Sapp and how it collides with Todd Bowles. I don't know if Todd Bowles necessarily needs that guy to, or I should say needs that guy. I don't know if Todd Bowles wants that type of guy that's going to ruffle the feathers when he thinks he has a plan in place. Now, does Todd Bowles need that? Probably. There is an argument to be made that Todd Bowles needs that assistant coach, that defensive coach that's just like, all right, I've had enough of this. We need to mix something up. We need to do something differently. And if no one's going to say it, I'm going to be the one to say it. Warren Sapp would be the guy to be like, all right, Todd, this is enough. We have to try something else. Now, would Warren Sapp want to come to Tampa Bay and be the defensive line coach? It sure makes a lot of sense. He's at a lot of games when he wasn't the defensive line coach of Colorado.
He was just at the playoff game.
He's been here coaching Logan Hall before. He coaches a lot of prospects going into the draft. A lot of this as well depends on his relationship with Deion Sanders. Would Coach Prime be fine with Warren Sapp leaving? I don't know his contract with Colorado. It's certainly something that makes a lot of sense. We've seen across the league now former players of teams coming back to coach their teams, whether it's Dan Campbell with the Lions, now Aaron Glenn with the Jets. It happens all the time. I'd like to see Warren Sapp as the defensive line coach in Tampa. I just don't think it's that realistic at this moment.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. One option that might be slightly more realistic in terms of fitting with Bowles would probably be Gerald McCoy, who's a current analyst. Buchan says Gerald McCoy replied to Greg Allman today saying he would love to coach the Bucs defensive line. And that would be an intriguing development. I know somebody else in the comments mentioned Ndamukong Suh. And when you look for maybe guys that had connections to Tampa or Todd Bowles, I mean, it would start with Warren Sapp, obviously, but also a guy like Gerald McCoy would be really interesting too. Is he seems more laid back and he seems more of like a Bowles fit, if that makes sense.
It does, and obviously they are way more familiar with each other, and there's a history there. That would be cool. I don't know if he would go from immediately from being an analyst to a defensive line coach. It almost feels like he would have to be, not that he has to be, but let him be like an assistant D-line coach first before you immediately promote him to a new job like that. The same way that Keith Tandy became an assistant and he's doing special team stuff and a little defensive stuff as well. But hey, this would be something that's a new idea. Be on board with different things. Obviously, Gerald McCoy accomplished a lot of great stuff as an individual player for the Buccaneers. I know the team success was not there, but that's not all on Gerald McCoy. But I'm open to it. Maybe bring in Sapp and Gerald McCoy. Let Sapp be the D-line coach, Gerald McCoy be the assistant D-line coach, and you get a little, good cop, bad cop situation, depending on who you think is the good cop and who you think is the bad cop. But either way, the more we talk about it, the more I'm intrigued by it, just based on their history with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Another piece of history is a group of people that we have worked with for quite a while now in a couple of different stints, and that is our friends over at Briar Greaves. There's no better insurance group to work with than Briar Greaves, especially when it comes to living in the state of Florida and what has gone on in this state over the past couple of months with some disastrous weather and, just trying to get your lives back together. And of course, the history of Briar Greaves and Pewter Report goes back to, if you're a longtime podcast listener, you probably remember the late, great Mark Cook talking about Briar Greaves Insurance. Pewter Report Scott Reynolds has been a Briar Greaves customer for years, and there simply isn't a better insurance company in the Tampa Bay area. So visit briargreavesinsurance.com to see for yourself. Briar Greaves Insurance is family-owned, and their main goal is helping people. They are helping people find the right insurance policy for you and your family, whether it's home or auto, boating insurance, or business insurance. Turn to Briar Greaves and find out why their personal touch and customer service sets them apart. The day of waiting on hold to speak with an insurance representative that you don't even know are over. With Briar Greaves Insurance, you'll have a relationship with your agent who can answer your questions and advise you on the best policies. As 2 recent hurricanes have shown all of us that live in the Tampa Bay area, there is a cost to living in paradise. Briar Greaves can help make sure you have the right hurricane and flood insurance to make sure you and your home are protected. Visit briargreavesinsurance.com today. That's Briar, B-R-I-E-R, Greaves, G-R-I-E-V-S, or call their office today at 813-876-4166. That's 813-876-4166, and tell them that Pewter Report sent you. So thank you to Briar Greaves. Let's get to a couple more comments as we round out the show. Starting with Ronnie Robinson, who says, Bull stays loyal to Kacy, and Kacy is still leaving, LOL. Needs to get rid of safety, corner, outside linebacker coach. At this point, it seems better to clean house than kind of stick with the old that didn't work.
Yeah.
And what will the new look like? Will the new and the old clash on the different ideologies of how to run this defense? That's another thing that needs to be considered.
Yeah. And what would be interesting, though, Matt, is let's say Larry Foote doesn't get the defensive coordinator job. What would happen to him? And do you think he would maybe also get some say and some defensive coaching moves? Like if Todd Bowles texts him right now and he's like, Larry, if you stay, you're going to be defensive coordinator. You can hire whoever you want. I mean, would that be enough sway to maybe convince him to stay?
I think so. Having that type of control. I mean, Bowles would have to sign off on it. Like, it'd be kind of silly to be like, hey, I'm still going to call the plays, but you're going to have all the power. That doesn't, make a lot of sense. And right now, there's only an opening for D-line coach in this hypothetical that Larry Foote comes back. Now, if Larry Foote says, hey, the only way I'm coming back is if we change this, this, and this, and Bowles goes, okay, I'm down with it. Yeah, you have all the reason to come back.
I mean, as a young defensive mind, just getting his input on things, I think would be valuable. Because, I mean, on offense, it worked. Liam Cohen had input on guys that he wanted, and you saw them have a top 5 offense. I mean, if Bowles let Larry Foote kind of have more personnel influence, I think that would be beneficial too.
Yeah. I mean, he's been there since 2019. I'm sure that, Bowles holds him in the highest regard at this point. And then if not, that's probably why Foote's leaving.
Yeah.
Mopar Buck says, offer Saleh a bag to do his thing with our defense.
You'd love it.
on paper, it makes a lot of sense. But why, if Robert Saleh doesn't get the Jaguars head coaching job, why wouldn't he go to San Francisco where he knows everybody on that team, on that staff? I get it. Like, maybe you try something else different, but also, would Bowles be okay giving up the head coach, the defensive play calls? That also has to be factored in.
Yeah, and if Robert Saleh is still viewed around the league as a future head coach, I mean, you'd have him and Cohen like knocking on the door should the Bucs falter next year. I mean, Bowles also has to consider his job security and bringing somebody
Yes.
like Saleh in. And like the 49ers job just makes so much sense. Like an opportunity, get back on the map, get him back to being a top 5 defense, go land another head coaching job because I think he eventually will, but I don't think it's going to start with coming to the Bucs.
Yeah, we'll see what happens in Jacksonville. Anything could really happen.
Yeah, really could.
JB says Todd needs a youth movement on the defensive staff. Perfect opportunity this offseason. I fully agree. Fully agree. Benji DeGoat says, just joined in to see opinions as a Lions fan. Would love to know what people think of Rodgers at D-line coach and then Foote as a coach and defensive coordinator. Well, thanks for tuning in, Benji DeGoat. We always welcome fans from other teams, and makes a lot of sense with the moves that just happened to your team. So we talked about this earlier on the show, but we'll repeat it again. You know, Kacy Rodgers has been around for a very long time, but he's gotten the best out of his players. Yes, he's had talent with Vita Vea and Kalijah Kancey, but it's one thing to just have good players. Kalijah Kancey, in his second year, and he missed the first month of the season, in his second year, led the Bucs with 7.5 sacks. Vita Vea, 7 sacks on the season, and going to the Pro Bowl, and a premier run stopper in this league. Logan Hall was a guy that we were saying, and he's their other defensive tackle in the rotation. Logan Hall was a player that before the season started, we said, when his contract is up, he's probably gone. Now, he's going into a contract year coming off of 5.5 sacks, a career best, 28 tackles, a career best, also has a career best in tackles for loss, had 9 tackles in that playoff game against Washington. Kacy Rodgers has very much helped develop his game and the run game, being able to stop the rushing attack. Since 2019, since he got into the building, he's been doing that consistently during his time. Larry Foote has seen the game in many different ways, being an outside linebackers coach and then an inside linebackers coach. He struggled in pass game coverage last year. The Bucs were terrible at it. Now, how much do you blame Bowles? Because he's actually calling the plays, and that's the big thing with Larry Foote. He wasn't calling the plays. And so you take that a little bit with a grain of salt. You got to coach Levante David when he was an outside linebackers coach. You got to coach JPP and Shaq Barrett, and they did really well. Levante David's the GOAT. I don't know how much Larry Foote had to do with that. But he's a player's coach. He's suave. He's calm, cool, collected. He knows how to press certain buttons to try to motivate people. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Started out good with Devin White, even though he wasn't coaching him specifically, but it still had him in his ear. Devin White regressed. KJ Britt started out pretty good. He regressed. But Servassier Dennis, he turned out pretty good up until his injuries. So Larry Foote, you got a guy that played in the league for a long time, learned under Bruce Arians, learned under Todd Bowles. He wants to level up, and his opportunity to call plays, I think, will be the biggest motivating factor for him specifically.
Yeah, I think you outlined that very well. The only thing I would add about Rodgers, as we mentioned before, defensive line guru, he does it in a very laid-back way, and I think that's one thing Lions fans, they might appreciate, because Dan Campbell, he's all about ripping kneecaps off, but Kacy Rodgers is a very mellow, laid-back guy who's very transparent, I would say, in his press conferences during the week, and just kind of talking about his players and the guys in the building. I think Rodgers is a very likable coach, and I think the same can be extended for Foote. And I like that you mentioned the word suave, and that's kind of the vibe you get when you talk about Larry Foote. Like, he walks in there, he's like, "Hey guys, Merry Christmas, Happy Thanksgiving." Like, he just has that confidence, and I think that's probably what I wonder if, like, behind the scenes when Kacy Rodgers was interviewing, he's like, that Larry Foote guy. He's something else in Tampa Bay. You should interview him too, and it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds. But regardless, if he ends up moving on. I think the Lions are getting two of the best defensive coaches in Tampa Bay and two guys that could really breathe some new room and still keep the floor of where the Lions were at this season.
So we talk to Foote and Rodgers every other week. So like 1 week we get Rodgers, the next week we get Foote, and vice versa. Yeah, both very, very nice people, great men. And Larry Foote, yeah, he makes you feel good. Like when he's walking up, being like,
he's
"Hey,
always
what's
smiling."
going on?"
Yeah.
Yeah. Nathan Elliott says, Sue is a coach. That is an interesting thought. Vea and Kacy are supposed to be working out with him this offseason. Yeah, Vita Vea did work out with him last year. I haven't seen anything about Sue wanting to be a coach. He's got a lot of ventures that he has going on, business and all these different things. So I don't know if he wants to coach. If he does, then hell yeah, sign up for it. I mean, he's a future Hall of Famer, in my opinion. And we have a super chat from Slay 509. Thank you, Slay, with this $4.99 super chat, who says, "This is a sign to me that these two quality coaches don't want to be associated with this bad pass defense. Seems like a vote of no confidence to me." Again, a little sketchy with the whole turning down an offer from the Bucs to go to another team. I think if you look at the overall outlook of this team, though, and the history that they have, I'm surprised that they're not giving Bowles and the front office the benefit of the doubt to right their wrongs and fix a lot of things personnel-wise on the defense.
Yeah, and that extends to, Matt, I want to make the point that, like, Todd Bowles, this is his biggest challenge, I want to say, as being a head coach in the NFL, because you look at all the changes that need to be made on the defense. I mean, when we are going to be at the Senior Bowl next week, it's all about the biggest positions on defense, and pretty much every single one needs to be improved. But not only the personnel needs to be improved, now you're talking about the coaching staff. There must be changes. There must be improvements made. I mean, Bowles is a defensive head coach. He's going to need to get this right. He's going to need to make the right hires, bring in the right guys, like not only the guys that he's going to be giving responsibility to, but the guys he's going to be trusting to play on Sundays. I mean, that to me is a huge test. And if he doesn't pass it, that makes his future a lot less certain.
One thing that is always right is going to walk-ons for your next meal and food and drink.
Yeah, so what happened out there tonight?
We struck out at home with leftovers, then we remembered walk-ons.
What effect did the situation have?
Spirit soared. Nick took on a burger. Jen obliterated her ribeye po' boy. And speaking of spirits, Laura even scored a real tasty cocktail. She needed that.
Any lessons learned today?
Yeah. Head straight to walk-ons.
Scratch-made dishes, wall-to-wall TVs, craft beers, and cocktails. Walk-ons for the win.
That's right. Walk-ons has great deals like happy hour every single day of the week from Monday through Friday. Very cheap deals, very inexpensive, great food, great drinks as well. Check out their game day specials too on Saturdays and Sundays. Obviously, people will be busy on Saturday with Gasparilla coming up. On Sunday, you got the AFC and NFC championship games. But you can get pints of Michelob Ultra, Bud Light, and Budweiser for $4.49, 22-ounce drinks for $5.99, $5 Heineken Silvers, and $5 Neutrals as well. So shout out to walk-ons. There's 3 in the Tampa Bay location, one in Lakeland, another in Wesley Chapel, another in Midtown Tampa as well. So tons of great choices that you can go to with walk-ons, with their food and drink as well. By the way, just a reminder to everybody, we have another show coming up tonight at 8:30. It is the first mock draft by PewterReport.com this season, all about the Bucs, all 7 rounds. Scott Reynolds and Josh Capo. We'll have a Pewter Insider tomorrow at 1:30, so keep on the lookout for that. Thank you again to everybody that has subscribed to Pewter Report TV. We are now over 17,000 subscribers. We really appreciate that. And if you're not already doing so, please follow us on our social media on X, Facebook, and Instagram. We are at Pewter Report, and our YouTube channel is Pewter Report TV. Please continue to tell others to subscribe and subscribe yourself, and hit the like button, leave a comment on this video as well. That'll do it for us this afternoon. For Adam Slavon, I'm Matt Matera saying thanks everybody for watching. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the show later. Enjoy Gasparilla, and we'll see you soon for another edition of the Pewter Report podcast. Out.
Out.